Well, welcome everyone to our Ask the Doc with Dr. Lee Ostler, who's joining us. We are live streaming on our Asea VIP customer group. Really excited to have Dr. Ostler joining us this morning. And this is a very open format. So we've done interviews in the past, but we are actually going to be encouraging all of you to put any questions that you have pertaining to Asea, Redox over in the chat, or you can also put it in the comments live streaming on Facebook. So go ahead and put those in there. We're going to be doing a little bit of introduction of Dr. Ostler, and then we will be getting to all of your questions. So good morning and welcome. We are just so excited to have Dr. Ostler joining us this morning. He has such a wealth of knowledge. He actually has been a dentist for the last over 30 years. He's authored several books in that space, and now he is actually authoring a book about redox. He is on Asea's medical professional board. He is the founder and program chair for the Medical Dental Summit. It's an annual gathering of physicians and dentists in the Northwest, and it focuses on principles and practices of oral systemic health. And he is also the subject of a documentary that's titled Bridging the Gap that highlights his work. And he is the developer of RedoxDentistry.com. And so he is joining us this morning. We are so glad to have him joining us. Dr. Ostler, good morning and welcome.
Well, thank you, and welcome to everybody who's dialing into this from wherever you're at. It's a pleasure for me to be on with you and provide some context and answers, hopefully, to some obviously wonderful questions. But thank you.
Yes. Well, you know what, before we dive into those questions, can you share with us in your own words, what is redox and why is it important?
Well, redox is probably the most important thing in life because it is how our cells work. We have we're real focused on our body. We're real focused on our health and using common sense to avoid bad things. But at the cellular level, this is where health begins. It's at that metabolic level of biochemicals. I know that's not a subject everyone enjoys studying, but it's at that level that's what dictates health and disease or degrees of wellness. And we have this idea that in our modern culture that if I don't have symptoms and if I can function and perform my activities of daily living, then I must be healthy. And really, health is more than the absence of symptoms. There's a molecular basis for it, and that's what redox is. Redox is the movement of electrons along on specific pathways in our cells that dictate how they function. And what redox does is to optimize. I should say what we're doing with redox. Let's put it that way: is we're helping the cells to be functional in an optimum way. It's like filling the gas tank up with those molecules that allow it to do its communication. And that's important because as we age, those processes at that physiological level become diminished. We become depleted. We wear out. That's why we grow old and wrinkle and get gray hair, and we're not as healthy, and we don't rebound as quickly as when we're younger. And we have that process all happening at a much higher level. Well, we have the ability to restore or replenish or supplement, whatever word you want, those very molecules that actually do the communication, that conduct the business of the cell. And so that's what's fantastic about what we've identified here are these redox signaling molecules that are bioidentical with the native ones that our cells are already making, but just not so much of them anymore as we get older. So that restores that cellular communication, and so the cells can function and do what they're supposed to do. And when that happens, I call it the inner doctor awakens. And so we can heal from the inside out rather than having to depend on the outside in interventions that we call medications. This isn't to disparage them. Certainly, if I'm in pain or hobbling around, I mean, there are solutions for that, even in the herbal space, but certainly in modern medicine. And so we don't begrudge that. This is a call to perhaps a higher or more foundational, we'll call it, level of doing the things and restoring the activities so that my body can do the healing like it's supposed to do it. That's what redox biology is about, whether I get there through this or through lifestyle corrections that activate those same pathways.
Oh, fantastic. And I love that saying, awakening the inner doctor. That's fantastic and really just powerful. Can you tell us a little bit, you are the founder of redoxdentistry.com. Can you tell us about that resource? Can you tell us why you created it and perhaps some of the tools and resources people can find there?
Sure. Redox Dentistry, that happened because I'll just kind of back up a little. I'm a past president of the American Academy for Oral Systemic Health. And oral systemic health is the connection between the mouth and the body. And that's something that I have some expertise in because I've been living it for so long. But uniquely, in my exposure to what we have with redox signaling molecules, the light went on in my brain that recognized these connections, and that diseases in the mouth, have a redox basis, just like any problem anywhere else in the body has a redox basis. And so in this coming together, it was about a recognition that the health of my mouth and the health of what goes on in my body have this connectedness. There's a platform there that people are beginning to understand in the real world. And so I thought, well, there needs to be a place where we can at least begin connecting those dots and helping people recognize, at least health professionals to recognize that what we've been studying for probably a couple of decades now in this field of oral systemic health care can be greatly benefited by understanding these basic nutritive and signaling principles that we've all come to know and appreciate in the redox world. It's not exclusive with us. There's many things that help improve health, but they all do it on the same redox basis. We just happen to, I think, have an advantage there because we have access to some, groundbreaking technology that kind of speeds it along, as it were. And so Redox Dentistry and the Redox Dentistry Facebook group was put together with the idea of just having a platform or having a space where we could begin to tie those arenas together and discuss what happens at the cellular level with these various and related health issues. Again, we're very careful as we talk about this to not present it in the form of a diagnosis or a cure, or to speak about medical diseases specifically. But there is a relatedness to it. It's and the thing that gives us this permission is because of that redox biology. That is the foundation. That's how every cell in the body works. And so you could pick your space and create a website or a Facebook group around that specific cell if you wanted to. But this is just a way that gives us an approach to be able to discuss that maybe in a different way.
Fantastic. And you are a professional in the medical space. A lot of people often wonder, well, you're a dentist and you're familiar with redox. Why isn't my dentist familiar with redox? Or why aren't many other medical professionals familiar with redox?
Well, this is new. It takes, they've actually done studies on that. It takes 17 years from the first introduction of an idea in the medical research space for it to go from that first thought to actual clinical application. Ironically, that was the amount of time that the initial R&D biotech researchers spent in developing this redox technology that we're now benefiting from. And from there, it took another 10 years for it to actually get to where we're at now. And so it does require some time. And there's a lot of vested interests, shall we say, in many other avenues and many other ways of thinking. And so that's the nice part about being in front of this kind of science, is because it's true, it's going to happen, and positioning yourself in front of that wave of knowledge and in front of that wave of practical application. There's some strategic advantage into that in about every way you can think of.
Yeah, fantastic. And, you know, we actually, I think we'll jump right into the questions. We've got a lot of questions that are coming in from people. Again, if you have a question for Dr. Ostler, kind of learning a little bit about his background and his knowledge, go ahead and put your questions over in the chat, or you can put them in the comments on Facebook, and we will get to those questions. And so the first question actually is kind of a great segue from what we were just talking about. How would you recommend someone introduce their dentist to Redox and the idea behind Redox, and let them know that they're using that as a preventative alternative?
Well, I think we'll approach that question with the premise that you meaning the person doing the introduction, are not a science-based, science-minded health professional yourself. And so the best way to do it is just to, it's like, if you must speak, ask questions, ask them if they're aware, if they've heard about it, rather than, you have to play the psychology game. You don't show up at your neurosurgeon's office one day and start schooling them on their craft. It's not going to go well. And so asking questions and saying, this is what I've heard, this is what I see other doctors doing. And kind of leveraging your segue into that conversation that way, and don't get too wrapped around the axle about it, because most won't. Some will, but most won't. And so don't. I wouldn't overthink it. I would just use the tools that we have and leverage. We've got some really great information and videos and reports and whatnot written by many health professionals involved with Asea. And so find something and leverage it, or send them to my website, or but I would just say send them to Real Redox Results and say, just look at that. And if you're curious to find out, because if you're intellectually honest, you're going to want to know if there's some basis to this. And we meaning health professionals, we knew about redox. When I first learned about it, it was like, gee, I think I heard about that once in a chemistry class. So it's not like this is coming out from outer space. This is well grounded. It's a new application. That's how I would approach it.
Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, the resource that he just mentioned is realredoxresults.com. It's a website with testimonies that are really well organized. And so just a great resource if you want to share some of the experiences people are having by supplementing with Redox. And the biggest phrase that I just took away is, yeah, I love that. If you must speak, ask questions. I think that can apply to a lot of areas of life, right? So
yeah.
I love that. Okay, well then another question that we have, will Asea help regrow and heal my receding gums? It's not from periodontal disease, but just from degenerative tissues.
Well, again, I have to go back to the disclaimer and explain that we're not putting this out there with the idea that we can heal or correct or treat or anything. I know that there are many anecdotal stories that, case studies, if you will, that talk about the improved report they received from their hygienist or their dentist as a consequence of utilizing this, and I will not diminish or, go against any of that. The dentist brains, cells in my brain, would probably say, I don't understand how that could happen, to regrow gum tissue that has lost its foundational base, and that's what causes a recession. It's just not logic, but I will not deny that it couldn't happen. Let's put it that way. So,
Yeah. And next question that we have is, if I have metal fillings in my mouth, what is the best way to drink Asea to have the best effect of the redox molecules? And how sensitive is Asea to the metal in my mouth?
I do not want, this is a question that I've been asked probably 100 times,
I bet.
because, we know that we know it's important that we don't denature these bioactive, reactive, energized molecules that are suspended in our Asea saline beverage by having, metal, by putting it in a metal cup or things like that. So that this is a great, segue question from that. It's like, well, is that going to, and my answer, and I don't want to be flippant and I don't want to disrespect the question, but it's like, don't worry. It's like, don't get wrapped around that axle either. It's like, get it in your mouth. These are nanoparticles. These very rapidly absorb, across mucous membranes in the mouth and the throat. Just like you put, medication under your tongue for absorbing it quickly, like nitroglycerin, for example, it has an immediate effect in the bloodstream to help, relieve the symptoms of angina and a heart attack. Well, these same tissues are rapidly absorbing Asea, and it's like, okay, if there's any way you could even do the scientific study to say that 4.5% of the molecules became inactivated, it's like, all right, but you still have 90 whatever percent that are working, and so I would just say do it. In short, my answer would be no. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And then this is also a great question, to just follow that previous question. It's usually recommended to swish Asea in your mouth before swallowing. What is the recommended length of time that you recommend swishing it in your mouth? And is there a benefit to your gums, your tongue, and teeth in the mouth when you swish it before swallowing?
Well, again, I'll be somewhat practical in my answer, and that is, I'll just to tell you how I do it. And if you could take a clue from that, perhaps that would be the best answer. And that is, I personally, I don't worry too much about the taste. I get that not everything tastes well. Some people can't get over that, and they glug it down and chug it down and try to get it out of their mouth as quick as possible. And it's like, I'm sure everybody on here, tasted something in high school that really was repulsive, but they did it anyway. You just do it. And so I sip it, I'll sip it in increments. I just carry that little 2-ounce cup around with me wherever I'm at, and I'll just sip a little bit and then swish or sip it or suck it out of the sports pouch a little bit at a time. And I just maximize it. And, if you hold it in your mouth too long, if you hold Kool-Aid in your mouth too long, at some point you're going to start gagging on it. So just short of that mark somewhere is a good time to say, okay, it's time to swallow. And so really what I'm doing is I'm optimizing, maximizing any or whatever effect it will have on my mouth and the microbial load that is in my mouth, and getting maximum optimum absorption through those tissues as it's washing over my mouth, under my tongue, down my esophagus, all the way down. It's a more of a pragmatic answer, I guess. Just divide it in doses, sip it down. Having said that, we know, especially from all the case studies and anecdotal stories, even if you just rubbed this on, even if you sprayed it on, even if you wiped it on with one of those little hospital spongy, mouth cleaner things that you use in hospital. I mean, however you get it in there, you're going to get some on board. So.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that I think a lot of people probably aren't familiar with. You did mention it'll aid with the microbial load in your mouth. What can you speak to that just a little bit about what it does?
Not specifically. Anybody
Sure.
can go on PubMed and the internet and look at, if they know where to look, you can find the studies that are out there from 25 years ago, studying the precursor products to this and find out the answer specifically to that question down to the seconds involved in reduction of microbial load. Having said that, redox molecules are antimicrobial. That's what the immune system uses to kill bacteria. That's what ozone and hypochlorous and hydrogen peroxide and superoxide, that's what those molecules do in the immune system of the body. That's what phagocytosis is when my white blood cells are eating bacteria. Well, that's what these molecules are. I will let the viewer connect those dots and determine what impact that must have on microbial loads that are on my skin or in wounds or in my mouth, etc.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Okay, the next question. My dentist said to me that my damaged tooth enamel is due to drinking vinegar and lemon juice, and it can never repair itself. Is that really true? Using Redox, have you seen any positive effect on damaged tooth enamel repairing itself?
Well, there's an hour lecture in the answer to that question. And so let's see if we can summarize it. Tooth enamel and the dentin of the root surface are because they're a biomineral, meaning that there are calcium and phosphorus in an organic matrix. That's how biominerals like seashells and teeth enamel and so forth, that's how they're formed. They're susceptible to changes in the pH or the acidity, levels. And so if I put vinegar, which is an acid, if I put any acid in my mouth, if I let bacteria grow in my mouth that poop and pee in my mouth and produce toxic acidic byproducts, that's the whole point of dental health. If I allow that to happen, I'm removing calcium from my teeth, and so they become less dense. They become more porous. They become more like a sponge than a brick because I'm losing bacteria, or I'm losing calcium and minerals. And so, yes, that can happen from using an acidic, beverage or sucking lemons or whatever, the body has an amazing way to remineralize that, and that is through normal pH. So if I keep my mouth in a neutral pH zone, even the calcium and the phosphorus in my saliva can remineralize or go back into that sponge and make it like a brick again. So it's more dense and harder. Now, Asea, we know that it is a very neutral. It is a 7.3 pH, and it's plus or minus tenths, point tenths, and that's a logarithmic scale. And so if I'm using that as a swish in my mouth and putting it in my mouth, it has zero effect on this acid level, and it's not going to hurt my teeth for sure. That was one of the big questions I had when I first started, was I needed to know the pH before I'm swishing and recommending this. And it's absolutely a neutral pH, so it has zero effect in that regard. Anything that neutralizes my mouth is going to have a positive effect on my tooth enamel because it helps to restore the neutral pH balance. And that has nothing to do with the properties of Asea except for its pH. So the whole point is that, yeah, you can use Asea and it will have a positive effect on my tooth enamel, but not because it's some magic potion. It's because it is the proper pH.
Well, that's great. That's great to know. And here's another question that you probably get very frequently. It's about the salt content of Asea. Someone's asked, just curious if the amount of salt in Asea needs to be this high, or if the company can back down on the salt content.
Well, I can't answer that question from representing the company because I don't know what they're researching or what they're studying. Obviously, the medical side has been wrestling with that issue for a very, very long time. There is a very minute amount of salt in this because it is saline, but it is essentially negligible for most people. I would say, I'm not going to put a number on that, but for most people, it is a negligible thing. And salt, very seldom, in my view, very seldom does somebody, even when they're very sick, have to worry about the minor shifts in salt content that are represented in Asea. Usually we're talking about thousands of milligrams, and this has, a very small amount. So I'm not going to represent a medical answer, to that question. If you have concerns or your physician is counseling you not to, for me, it would certainly be a basis for asking some follow-up questions and doing some research. If I'm supposed to be on a very, very salt restricted, diet, I would say, well, then perhaps this is just a practical solution. Then cut out something else that has salt in it that you're eating and have this instead, just because I know the amazing benefits that cellular health has.
Awesome. Okay. And I've got next question that just came up. We've got some great questions coming in. So can Asea help negate the potential effects of deep mercury fillings?
Not from the fillings itself. I think the question is couched more in the biologic side of the effect of mercury fillings on the body. And again, that's another hour lecture because it has to do with metabolic pathways in the cell. The question is, why would one person be okay, quote unquote, with their metal fillings, their mercury fillings, and another person not? Is it because of the mercury filling itself, or is it because they lack the metabolic pathway activations to detoxify themselves of heavy metals or organophosphates and so forth that they're environmentally exposed to? And really, the more complete answer to that is in the latter. Some people, their metabolic pathways, due to genetic defects, aren't working like, at optimum levels. And so they're more affected by heavy metals that they become exposed to. Well, that's a problem. And so the idea is, can Asea help that regard? And it's not going to help about the metal filling, but it's going to help my detoxification pathways, which are primarily dependent on glutathione. And we know that glutathione is the master antioxidant and is intimately involved with detoxification. Well, if I'm at deficit there just because I have metabolic pathway problems, then this is going to be a helpful strategy to helping me to detoxify from the effects of having metal fillings. I haven't seen a metal filling that I ever like. And so I'm always taking them out because they're very ugly, and that's an okay reason to remove them. There's a subtle irony in that answer, but when they're gone, then the reservoir of heavy metal, or a reservoir of a source in the body of being exposed to that, is then removed. And so it stands to reason. There's some indirect relationships there, but Asea won't directly affect my fillings per se, but will improve my body's ability to detoxify from the things that they might be off-gassing and I might be absorbing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. And I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm actually going to pass it off to Danielle. We've got a lot of questions that are continuing to come in. So what brought you to diving into your knowledge about redox?
Well, I have a certain level of brain damage that's called OCD. I have to know, I'm really good at accepting things on faith. I'll take people's words for it, most of the time, but there are some, my nature is that I have to know why. I'm the guy that needs to know how electrons move from one thing to the next. And that's really the essence of redox, is the movement of electrons along those metabolic pathways. That's what we call the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. And so ever since my college days, my biochemistry classes, I was hooked. I just could not leave that alone. And so when I think that's why I dove into the oral systemic world. And if you want to know something really well, do the research enough to be able to write a book on it. And so I enjoy writing and doing the research, and that has just kind of prepared me for what I'm currently doing with writing Redox Matters, is because redox does matter, and it is that maybe that OCD obsession I have with wanting to know exactly how this works, and is it legitimate? You know, is there a preponderance of evidence that will connect these dots together in a way where I can explain this away and it totally makes sense, and I've now got legs underneath this, and it's not just about accepting somebody's word for it.
Beautifully said. And we just transitioned. My name's Danielle. I'm going to be taking over. Alyssa's little one just woke up and she had to run. So being a mom and juggling what she's doing. But I don't want that to slip by. You mentioned a book that you're writing. Lee, can you talk to us about that for a little bit?
Well, the title is Redox Matters, connecting the dots between redox biology and health. And the premise for that is, you know, we don't have the kind of science with Asea that we really want to have. And unfortunately, we'll never have it. I mean, we'll be fantastically blessed if that ever happens. But people are always saying, where's the science? Those are the questions I asked when I started. I was like, show me the science. I want to know that this is real. What are other health professionals saying? What does the research say? And nobody could provide that. It was all anecdotal. It was case studies. It was people talking about it. It was really the ground game, and that's what we had that's what we have in oral systemic. It's from a causal. What causes? You know, does A cause C? And it's like we can't make a causal connection between point A and point C except to go through point B and to connect the dots. And that's really what we have here. When we go into the research environment, we know the basic redox biology. You know, molecular biology has been around for decades. And people talk about impairments in redox biology being associated with various health maladies like heart disease and, you know, the C word and all those things, but we can't talk about it in definitive, you know, it causes it. That may come someday, but not now. And so the whole idea here is I have got to get into the ground science and understand it well enough. For example, if somebody says, we see this all the time, you know, a certain product will lower my cholesterol. Okay, that's fair enough. But we're educated enough to know that if my cholesterol is lowered, there's going to be a positive benefit with a certain health condition. I don't need a study that says that this product A is going to cure the health conditions that we label as C, because I already know the connection there. And so it's the same game here as in the intuitive processes of thinking through. And so that's really what, you know, that intrigued me so much that it, you know, as I started doing my own research and taking notes, I thought, this has got to be a book. I was like, there's other people asking me the questions of where's the science? And it's like, I can't give it to them. I mean, except to kind of hit and miss with this, but it's all assumptive. You know, we're making assumptions because of the preponderance of evidence that is so obvious. And that's the fun part, is you start connecting those dots. And for me, it turned back on itself, and I go, oh, that's why this matters. And so it's kind of a double play on the word matters, but redox does matter. And so these are the matters of redox. That's where that came from.
I like it. I like it a lot. And I appreciate and I'm grateful that you have a little bit of OCD and you want to dive in and write a book that all of us are going to be able to benefit from. I'm incredibly grateful to you for that. And there was a question that kind of segues into what you just said a little bit. People are asking, what are the sources that are available? So as you're writing this book, as you're looking and you're saying, okay, how can I connect the dots, right? I'm not going to see, oh, Asea in this study does this, but I'm going to see, oh, wow, redox plays this role in the body. So I can maybe make this connection. Where are you going to look up information like that?
Anybody can do this. That's what's so fun about this. You know, you just get on your computer. People talk about, well, you know, the internet is not trustworthy. It's garbage. And it's like, well, if you know where to look, you know, there are trusted sources, and those largely come from what we call government databases called PubMed. www.pubmed.com, but the easiest way to get there is just go into any internet search engine, your web browser, and just Google or Bing or whatever you want, and type in the words that you want to look for that's related to redox or redox signaling, or any words like that. So you can combine whatever words you want, whatever disease, condition, malady, problem you have, just type it in with the words redox signaling, and you'll start to get a return. When you query that, you'll get a return, and it will start listing the science. And so you start to recognize, where those databases are, and you start clicking around it, and once you read 10, 20, 50, 100 of those abstracts, you really just need to look at abstracts. Sometimes it's fun to go through the complete study itself, but they're all publicly available. And when you start doing those, and what I just did is I just copy and pasted. I just went in and I wrote the story of Redox Matters from the abstracts in probably 500 different articles. And you can't come away from that and not believe. You can't come away from that and say, well, this doesn't matter. This isn't legitimate. Redox signaling is not involved in all of these health conditions, because that's not what they've been saying for the last 30 years. It's in the science. So
wonderful. That's the same thing I did. At the time, I was dating someone that was getting their PhD in biology. My best friend was getting her PhD in biology. I graduated with a degree in biology, and we all went, okay, what's PubMed have to say? And we all came back from our own research and went, oh my gosh, what do we have our hands on? This is so exciting.
exactly.
Yeah, and it can be overwhelming, right? If you don't know science, you don't know how to read literature, like it's a little bit, overwhelming.
But here's the clue. In every abstract, as you know, it's a summary of what it is the research is. And some of the research is legitimate. Some of it is, very esoteric. But they always start with a premise. They always start with existing knowledge. Here's the premise. Here's the hypothesis. This is what we're going to test or write about, or this is what we're going to research and what other people have written about. And then here's our summary or conclusion or recommendation. That's the pattern of all of this research, by and large. If you know the pattern, then you can dive into an abstract and you can read the first few sentences, a couple of the middle sentences, and the conclusion. And come away from it and say, well, this is what they already knew. That's the truth. We don't know what they're studying is the truth or not until we can read 50 more studies that conclude that what they discovered is true. And so this is a moving thing. There's no one study that is ever declaratively final. It's a moving target that it kind of moves the channel forward, built upon what went before. And that's why I go back to, this is the preponderance, of this, of the preponderance of expert voices making these assumptions, conclusions, and declarative statements yield a connecting of the dots outcome that I'm going, oh, I get it now. This is true. This is legitimate. It would help. I don't need to have a random controlled study that shows that product A definitely helps with my heart disease, because I already know that it affects cholesterol. I'm just using that as an example. And we're not saying that about this. We're just saying as a model of understanding how to view it. I don't need to have the random control study because it would be impractical anyway. If people say, why can't we do that now? It's because it would destroy what we're doing. We would suddenly be regulated, like crazy, and we would have to declare this a drug because we're now treating a specific health condition because we're now making claims. And it's like, forbid the day that ever happens, because this is so generic. It's so, now it's going to come. There's pharmaceutical companies working on specific redox signaling switches that are deep inside these metabolic pathways that will do, one thing with one molecule. That's fine. That will be very nice for the whole entire conversation, and the rising tide raises all boats, kind of a thing. But for now, we're grateful that we don't have the random controls trials. And so that's why this is so important, because we kind of get put up against the wall. We get cornered by people saying, well, show me the science. And it's like, it is a great blessing that we don't have that kind of science. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing.
Wow, that's actually incredible perspective. Just from one, how to search online and learn about the research in a quick, easy way, and understanding that it's already, started on a base of knowledge that you can accept. And then number two, why we don't see those studies and that it is a blessing. That's fascinating perspective. I would be yelled at if I didn't ask this question. I've got it asked like 10 times now. When is the book available? And how can someone get the Redox Matters book?
Well, the book is still here in draft form. We're getting close. I'm hoping the answer to the question is midsummer is when I'm hoping that it'll be available, and certainly before the North American event in Nashville.
Okay, great. And those of you that are on the VIP customer group, we of course will announce it in there and show you how to get it if you want it. So there's just a couple of questions. They're more specific on some things people have going on. So answer as you can, but this person has a concern. They have an old root canal that's been infected for years and is causing inflammation. Like they can see the inflammation in thermographic imaging scans, and they're using the gel 3 times in 5 minutes on their face, swishing with 4 ounces of Asea twice a day. And they're wondering, is there more that can be done?
Yes. This is an often asked question, and I don't want to step in some sticky poo here. So a root canal is, or an infected tooth is a dead object. It's a foreign object to my body. The reason why I'm responding and reacting, abscessing, inflamed, whatever word you want, to it is because it is a foreign object. It is not me anymore. The cells have changed. And so my immune system is recognizing that that's what's going on, just like it responds to a sliver that I get in my skin. And if you leave the sliver, if you don't do your own surgery and you leave the splinter in your skin for a week or two, it's just going to fester up. That's the body's response to a foreign object. And eventually it works its way to the surface and you can take the splinter out. Well, a tooth is embedded in bone. It doesn't work its way to the surface only unless the bone winds up becoming dissolved away as a result of the infection, which takes a long time. So when people say, well, can I do something, magically with Asea or any other, substance to resolve this problem? The answer is no. If you have a dead tooth, it's a dead tooth. It's not going to make it alive again, and it's not going to clean out the bacteria and make your immune system super strong to defeat this dead tooth. It is a dead tooth. And your answer is you either do the root canal or retreat it the second time, or you remove the dead tooth and get the foreign object out of your mouth, and in its place do something different, such as an implant or a bridge or something like that. And so if you have that situation, you really do need to follow the advice of your own personal dentist. If it's a root canal tooth that is failing, it's failing. And taking Asea or vitamins or humming a certain frequency, whatever, however you want to approach it, is not going to change the fact that this is a dead tooth. It's already gone. The nerve is not there, and it's just pond water inside your tooth. So that's kind of firm. Now, can something like Asea, can it help me to recover? Can it help me to, got to put this right, can it help my immune system be stronger in the face of that? Of course. But it's not going to change the fact that I have a foreign object embedded in my bone that's going to take 3 decades to dissolve away. And in the meantime, I'm going to wind up in the hospital, with this big orofacial infection that's going to threaten my life. It's just not worth it. So my answer is no. If you have a root canal problem, get it taken care of either by removing the tooth or having it retreated. Use Asea, say your prayers, eat good food, do whatever you want to support yourself in your healing. That's fine. But I hope that was not offensive or that was clear enough.
Super clear. And actually, I've learned a ton about dentistry with you this morning. So, you hear the word root canal. I never really understood what that was all about. So thank you for that insight. There's another question on here that I'm not sure if you can answer, but it's interesting given that we were just kind of talking about foreign object. This person has concerns because they've had cataract surgery and they have like a lens implant, and they're wondering if it's okay to have Asea because the lens is now a foreign object, and like, will Asea attack it? I have never been asked that question myself, and I'm not sure if you can handle it, but there you go.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to answer that one.
Yeah.
You know, I would go back to the basic principles of saying, does something like Asea, anything that activates my cell signaling, anything that improves and increases my glutathione, the superoxide dismutase, the gene signaling, is anything like that, is that going to help me across the broad breadth of health problems that I might encounter? And of course, the answer is that we believe strongly, of course it will. You know, this isn't like we have the magic potion, even though I think it kind of is. The important thing to know is that redox, as we have it, as we play the game with Asea, is activating nature's pathways that protect me and help me to be strong against all of these problems. Whether it will help with this specific eye problem or not, or a joint problem or not, we can't say that. All I can say is that it's going to awaken the inner doctor within, and the results will be what they are. So I would say, again, in the same way, if you have a cataract, if you have an eye problem, go speak to your physicians, and don't do anything foolish or silly, but just play the game at that base level, understanding what the ground science is.
Exactly. And also remembering we have redox in us. So redox is already working in our systems.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lee. This was a fabulous conversation. Like I said, I learned a lot about just oral health and dentistry, and I am incredibly grateful to you and all that you're bringing to the Asea community with this book that you're writing and the dedication you're putting into that. I know it takes a lot of time and energy, and your perspective is appreciated. I think I speak for everyone. We have had, gosh, over 150 people on here between Zoom and live streaming, and I'm watching on Facebook a ton of people being tagged in this interview. So I think this will live on for a while. And are there any closing thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up?
I want to just say thank you for inviting me on, and having this conversation. I would encourage people to just, I use the expression, don't get wrapped around the axle. We like to think that we believe that we have something very special here, and we do. This is activating very important ground science in every cell of our body. And what we want to be able to do is to make declarative statements about what its effect will be. And the only declarative statement that we can make is that it will help my cell work better. That's what this is really about. Whether it has specific outcomes or not is a function of so many variables that we couldn't even begin to enumerate them here. And so we just have to be cautious and careful that we're not overstating it, and that we're playing to the ground science of what this is doing in every cell of our bodies. And with that, then I can have a more optimum approach to health, because my cells are working like they're supposed to work. I mean, we get sick. This is the assumption. The reason I get sick or have disease or conditions, barring genetic, issues, there's some genetic issues that they're locked. They're locked and loaded, and we can't change our skin color or some of the mutations that happen in that regard. But outside of that, we do have the ability to affect in an epigenetic way the overlay on that DNA, and to it has a result that our cells work better. We can actually, this puts us in charge. This is why people who exercise and who eat right and who meditate and reduce stress and have good gut health and good oral health, who sleep right and have a good airway. Why are all those things related to health? Because they play on this very same redox pathway. They activate the mitochondria to produce redox signaling molecules that are native in the body. And when I do more of those things, I get more redox signaling. We've just simply found a biohack. We found a way that we can manipulate that and manage it. And so you can't sit on the couch and drink this stuff and eat Cheetos and watch football and think that you're going to suddenly get healthier. You may. It needs to be combined with all these other sensible things to synergistically, as I say, awaken that inner doctor. So I'll kind of leave it at that. And I so appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you and answer some questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the perfect note to end on. We found a biohack. I love that. Well said. And guys, this recording will be available on Asea United's Vimeo channel. We'll get it up there, and it's also going to live on forever in the Facebook VIP customer group for people that are consumers of Asea. So make sure that you're in there. If you're using the products, there's amazing information in there on how to use it properly, frequently asked questions, that kind of thing. You'll get all the support that you need. That community is, gosh, over 8,000 people now around the world and sharing their experiences. So make sure you're in there. And we will certainly put the Redox Matters book information in there when it gets published. So Lee, thank you. Best of luck with finishing that. And have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody.